The dawn broke with a silence that felt wrong, not the gentle hush of a new day, but a silence pulled taut, like a rope about to snap. The cotton fields of Georgia usually stirred with the rustle of leaves, the shuffle of bare feet, and the low hum of tired voices preparing for another day of endless labor. But on this morning every sound was strangled by the sight before them. The cotton gin wheel was turning, not slowly, not lazily with the wind, but with a grinding purpose. Each creak of its wood cut the air like a scream, and from the rim of the wheel, droplets fell, dark, sticky, glistening in the weak light of sunrise. Blood. The slaves froze in place, women clutching their baskets, children staring wide-eyed, men standing rigid, unable to move. Their eyes followed the wheel's slow spin until they saw what was tied to it. The overseer. His body had been lashed to the wooden spokes like a grotesque scarecrow. His arms hung limp, his head bent unnaturally, his face a mask of blood and terror frozen in death. The wheel carried him up, turning, then dragging him back down again, forcing every eye to watch his broken body rise and fall with each rotation. A gasp cut through the silence. Someone whispered, voice trembling, "Lord, help us." Another voice, barely louder than a breath, said what everyone was already thinking. Who did this? The cotton field was now an open theater, and the overseer's corpse was the centerpiece of a performance meant to horrify, to shock, to burn itself into memory. The wheel groaned as it turned, the ropes cutting into flesh, blood dripping into the dirt below, mixing with cotton fibers scattered on the ground. A young boy, no older than 12, clung to his mother's skirt. "Mama, it's the devil," he whispered, her hand pressed against his mouth. "Hush," she said, though her eyes never left the wheel. The masters hadn't yet arrived. The only witnesses were the workers, their faces caught between terror and something else, a flicker, deep in their eyes. For some, it was fear of punishment, of the storm that would surely follow. But for others, it was recognition. This wasn't an accident, this was deliberate. The overseer had been tied there by careful hands, with purpose, with meaning. The cotton gin, the very machine that turned their labor into profit, their sweat into wealth, was now the stage for vengeance. The silence broke again, this time with the creak of the big house's porch door opening. From the far side of the field, voices barked orders. Dogs barked, men shouted. The masters were coming. The workers looked at one another, wide-eyed, unsure whether to run, to hide, or to kneel in prayer. One man muttered under his breath, "Ain't no accident. Somebody planned this." And though no one dared to say his name, though no one pointed toward the forge or the strong arms that worked it, a thought flickered through the crowd like a secret flame. The blacksmith. The one who shaped iron. The one who knew tools, chains, and weapons better than any man on the plantation. The wheel turned again, the overseer's body rising and falling with its relentless spin. The question hung in the air, heavier than the scent of blood. Who had the courage to strike? Who had turned the wheel red? The body turned, creaking with every rotation of the wheel. By the time the masters and riders reached the cotton field, the air was already thick with fear. The workers had fallen silent, their eyes lowered to the dirt, but silence couldn't hide what they'd seen. The overseer's corpse was impossible to mistake for an accident. His arms were bound with deliberate knots. His body wasn't slumped or broken in some random fall. It had been staged to send a message. The plantation owner's voice cut through the morning air, harsh, trembling with rage. "Who did this?" No one answered. The slaves stared at the ground, hearts pounding in their chests. The owner's son spat into the dirt, gripping his rifle. "It's the work of savages. One of them dared." His words hissed with venom, but behind the anger was something else, fear. The dogs barked wildly at the scent of blood, straining against their handlers. The overseer's body swung again, each creak of the wheel echoing like judgment. Among the slaves, whispers had already started. Not loud enough for the masters to hear, but carried in low tones between trembling lips. "It ain't no accident. Somebody planned this. Every knot, every rope. But who? Who had the strength?" One woman, her hands trembling around her basket, murmured, "The wheels turned on them. Somebody wanted us to see it." The thought was dangerous, terrifying, yet undeniable. The overseer had been the face of cruelty, the whip, the insults, the punishments. To see him strung up, humiliated, displayed on the very machine that powered their misery, it was too perfect, too precise. But perfection meant risk. Whoever had done this had stepped into fire. The price, if discovered, would not be just death. It would be torment, the kind masters reserved for making an example. A hush fell as the owner stepped closer to the wheel. He started at the body, his jaw clenched. The ropes were too neat, too intentional, his eyes narrowed. This was no accident, he muttered, almost to himself, then louder, so all could hear. This was rebellion. The word struck like thunder. Rebellion. Gasps rippled through the workers, though they kept their eyes down. Rebellion meant blood. Rebellion meant fire. And for the masters, rebellion demanded vengeance. The slaves knew what would come next. More chains, more whips, innocents punished until the guilty were found, or until the guilty confessed. But in the back of the crowd a man's voice whispered, barely audible. It was justice. A woman hissed at him, eyes darting. Quiet, fool, you'll get us all killed. Still, the word lingered. Justice. The overseer's blood dripped into the soil, soaking the cotton scattered beneath him. The wheel groaned again. The sound was almost alive, like the earth itself was answering back to centuries of cruelty. The masters barked orders, sending riders to search the quarters, the forge, the woods, the air filled with the stomp of boots, the clang of chains, the baying of dogs. But the workers stayed rooted in place, staring at the wheel as if it were a monument. Fear locked their bodies, yet something in their eyes betrayed another emotion, a dangerous hope. If one man could strike back, who else might dare? The wheel turned red, and with each rotation the whispers grew louder in their hearts. This was not an accident. This was a message. In the days after the overseer's death, suspicion spread like smoke. The masters searched every corner of the plantation, every hut, every hidden path into the woods, yet no culprit emerged. Still, the whispers carried one name. Malachi, the blacksmith. He was no ordinary man among the enslaved. Where others bent under the weight of chains, Malachi carried his strength like iron forged in fire. Tall, broad-shouldered, his arms scarred from years at the anvil, his hands rough but precise. His face was calm, unreadable, eyes dark and watchful. The forge was his world. There he commanded fire, hammer, and steel. The ring of iron striking iron echoed across the plantation like a heartbeat. To the masters he was useful, indispensable. To the slaves he was something more. Children watched him work, mesmerized by sparks flying in the dim light. Men respected his silence, his steady hands. Women whispered that he carried a fire inside him that could not be quenched. But what no one said aloud, at least not where ears could hear, was that Malachi was dangerous. One evening, as the forge glowed, a younger worker lingered nearby, eyes darting nervously. "You heard what they're saying, Malachi?" he whispered. Malachi didn't look up. His hammer fell against the iron, sparks scattering. "People say it was you." Malachi paused, lifted the iron with tongs, then plunged it into the water trough. The hiss of steam filled the silence. His eyes flickered toward the boy. "People say many things," he answered, voice low, steady. The boy leaned closer. "If it was you, some think it was justice. Some think it was madness." Malachi set down the tongs, wiped his hands on his apron. He studied the boy, his expression unreadable. "You talk too much," he said at last, before returning to the forge. But even silence can speak. The way he moved, the certainty in his shoulders, the fire in his gaze, those who saw him at the anvil wondered if the rumors were true. The overseer had always despised Malachi. To him, a slave who could wield iron was a threat. He watched him with suspicion, spoke to him with cruelty. More than once he'd muttered to others that the blacksmith's eyes held too much defiance. And now the overseer was gone, displayed, humiliated, executed on the very machine that ruled their labor. The masters questioned everyone, demanded answers, threatened punishment. No one spoke Malachi's name, not because they were certain of his innocence, but because in their hearts they wanted the story to be true. They wanted to believe one man among them had struck back. One night by the fire in the quarters, an old woman whispered to the others, her voice cracked with age. "The wheel turned because the hammer struck. Remember my words. The hammer struck." Her eyes flicked toward the forge, where sparks glowed against the night. Malachi said nothing. He never confessed, never denied. He worked by day, slept by night, carried himself as though the world hadn't changed. But it had. And with every creak of the cotton gin wheel, with every whispered name, Malachi's legend was being forged, one hammer strike at a time. The forge was a place of smoke, heat, and silence. While the plantation buzzed with the cries of overseers and the rustle of cotton, Malachi's world was filled with the steady rhythm of hammer against iron. Clang. Pause. Clang. The sound carried across the fields like a secret drumbeat, a reminder that not all chains were unbreakable. At the anvil, Malachi built more than tools. He studied the weight of metal, the balance of a blade, the curve of an edge. Every strike was exact, deliberate, never wasted. To the masters, he was repairing plows, fashioning nails, shaping hinges. To himself, he was training. Children sometimes crept close, peeking through cracks in the walls of the smithy. They whispered about the sparks that danced like fireflies and the strange magic of a man who could bend iron. Malachi never chased them away. He let them watch, though he rarely spoke. His silence was its own language. Late one evening, when the fields lay quiet, a young man approached him. Sweat streaked his brow, and his voice trembled as he asked, "Malachi, when you swing that hammer, what do you think of?" Malachi lifted his gaze slowly, the glow of the forge casting shadows across his face. His answer was simple, but heavy. "Freedom," he said. The word dropped into the air like molten iron. The young man's eyes widened. He wanted to ask more, but Malachi had already turned back to the anvil, his hammer falling again in steady rhythm. Freedom. It was a dangerous word. Spoken too loudly, it could bring the whip, or worse. But inside the forge, with the hiss of steam and the roar of fire, it lived safely. Each night, when the plantation slept, Malachi worked alone. He experimented with angles, testing balance in his hand. He shaped handles not just for tools, but for something heavier, stronger. He knew how to hide his work, slipping scraps of iron beneath piles of refuse, covetas, ring-sharpened edges with layers of soot. To an untrained eye, it was all just broken metal. But in Malachi's hands, it was practice. Every nail he shaped, every horseshoe he bent, was a lesson in strength and precision. He was forging more than iron. He was forging patience. One evening, a fellow worker dared to linger. "You plannin' something, Malachi?" The blacksmith's eyes flicked up, sharp and unyielding. He didn't answer. Instead, he dipped the glowing iron into the water trough, steam hissing into the darkness. The man flinched at the sound, then backed away. Silence was its own kind of warning. In the quarters, stories grew. They said Malachi's hammer spoke for him, that each strike was a promise, each spark a warning. He was silent not because he feared, but because he knew. And when the overseer's body appeared on that wheel, the silence around Malachi became heavier. No confession, no denial. Just the rhythm of the hammer, steady as a heartbeat, steady as the waiting storm. The firelight flickered against his face, casting him half in shadow, half in flame. His silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. And those who dared watch him too long began to wonder, was the blacksmith shaping tools for the masters, or weapons for himself? The overseer was a man without mercy. His shadow stretched long across the cotton fields, and with it came fear. His whip was never far from his hand, its crack splitting the air like lightning. For the enslaved, every sound of that leather lash meant pain, humiliation, or death. He was a man who thrived on cruelty. When others weakened under the Georgia sun, he seemed to grow stronger. His voice carried across the rows, barking orders laced with contempt. He didn't see people, only property, bodies to be broken and rebuilt for profit. Malachi felt that contempt more than most. To the overseer, the blacksmith was both valuable and dangerous. Useful because he kept the plantation running. Dangerous because he carried skill, strength, and something else. The quiet refusal to bow his head. One afternoon, as Malachi worked the anvil, the overseer lingered at the doorway of the forge. His eyes narrowed, watching the hammer rise and fall. "You think you're different, blacksmith?" he sneered. Malachi did not look up. His hammer struck again. Sparks flew. "Answer when I speak!" The hammer paused. Slowly Malachi raised his gaze. His silence was not submission. It was defiance, cloaked in calm. The overseer's lip curled. He stepped closer, whip coiled in his hand. "One day I'll break you," he said, voice low, venomous, "like I break the rest." The threat hung in the smoky air. Malachi said nothing. He turned back to the iron, as if the words meant nothing, as if the overseer himself were no more than smoke. But inside, his jaw tightened, his grip hardened. The others saw how the overseer targeted him. Whenever Malachi crossed the yard, the man's eyes followed, waiting, calculating. He punished others more harshly in Malachi's presence, as if daring him to react. Once, when a young boy stumbled under the weight of his basket, the overseer struck him until he bled. Malachi. I stood a few paces away, fists clenched. He wanted to step forward, but he knew, too soon, and everything would be lost. That night in the quarters, the whispers grew louder. He's baiting Malachi. He wants to break him. An old man shook his head. Or maybe he already knows. Maybe he feels the hammer waiting. The overseer's cruelty was not random. It was ritual, a performance of dominance meant to remind the enslaved of their place. But sometimes, performances are met with audiences who refuse to clap. One evening, as the overseer returned from the fields, he stopped near the forge again. Malachi was cooling a horseshoe, steam rising in thick clouds. The overseer smirked. You'll bend, Blacksmith. Iron bends, so will you. Malachi lifted the red-hot iron with tongs, placed it back on the anvil. His eyes met the overseer's. His voice, low and steady, broke the silence. Iron bends, he said, but it can also break. The overseer's smile faltered for the briefest moment. Then he laughed, a cruel, sharp sound, and walked away. But those who heard the words that night, workers, children, even the women hushed in the shadows, they never forgot them. Because they knew, iron in Malachi's hands was not just for plows and chains, it was for something more. And one day, when the overseer's whip cracked again, it would meet iron's answer. The overseer's shadow loomed heavier with each passing day. But where his cruelty struck fear into most, it sparked something else inside Malachi. Each insult, each lash, each scream of the whip drove the blacksmith deeper into a silence that was no longer just patience, it was resolve. The enslaved felt it too. Around the fire at night, whispers carried through the quarters. They spoke of Malachi not as a man, but as a force waiting to rise. He never asked for such talk, never encouraged it, but the way he carried himself, the calm stare, the quiet strength, made people believe. One evening, a woman whose back still bore fresh scars leaned close to him while the fire crackled. If anyone can stop him, it's you, she whispered. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned. Malachi looked at her, the flames dancing across his face. He didn't answer. Instead he rose, walked into the night, and left the fire's glow behind. His silence spoke louder than any promise. But in the forge, alone, he allowed his thoughts to run free. Every strike of his hammer felt like a question. How long could this continue? How much blood had to be spilled before the wheel turned the other way? The overseer had become bolder. He punished not just for mistakes, but for imagined slights. A woman caught humming a tune while working was struck. A man who glanced too long at the sky was whipped until he collapsed. The message was clear. No joy, no thought, no dignity would be tolerated. Malachi saw these acts and felt the fire in his chest rise. The blacksmith's forge was supposed to be a place of creation, but it became a chamber of rebellion. As his hammer struck, he wasn't only shaping iron, he was shaping intent. One night, a young man slipped into the forge, eyes darting nervously. You're planning something, he said in a low voice. Malachi wiped sweat from his brow, his face unreadable. I play on iron, he replied. The young man pressed. But iron can cut, iron can kill. The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the crackle of the fire, the hiss of steam. Finally Malachi turned, meeting the young man's gaze. Leave, he said simply. The boy hesitated, then obeyed, but he carried the memory of Malachi's eyes, steady, burning, certain. Among the enslaved, faith grew. They began to watch Malachi not just for tools, but for signs. His silence was interpreted as strategy, his steady hands as preparation. Though he never declared himself a leader, rebellion lived in the way people looked to him when the overseer's back was turned. And in the overseer's cruelty, Malachi saw both the problem and the answer. Every lash was a spark, every scream was fuel, and sparks, when fed long enough, grow into fire. The cotton fields, once only a place of labor and suffering, had become tinder waiting for flame. The overseer thought his whip controlled everything, but what he didn't know was that the fire had already started. And at its center stood Malachi, the silent blacksmith, hammer in hand, waiting for the moment when silence would end. The forge was no longer just a place of work. It had become a cathedral of fire, an altar where rebellion took shape. The hiss of iron meeting water was a prayer. The hammer striking metal was a heartbeat. Malachi knew every sound of the forge. He knew which blows could echo through the quarters and which could be muted by a muffled strike. But now, each motion carried risk. One wrong clang at the wrong hour, one curious glance, and the overseer would know. And so, under the cover of night, Malachi began. He chose a piece of iron thicker than the rest, one that the overseer had overlooked. From it he would forge not a tool, not a horseshoe, not a chain, but an axe, a weapon hidden in plain sight. Each night he worked only for moments at a time, his strokes quiet, his breathing measured. Sweat stung his eyes, but he dared not wipe it. The glow of the forge was too bright, it might betray him through the cracks in the wooden walls. When footsteps passed outside, he froze, pressing the unfinished blade against the cold floor until the sound faded. Only then would he resume, each hammer fall calculated, each spark controlled. By day the blacksmith was silent, obedient, crafting the tools demanded. But by night he became something else. A woman once slipped inside, eyes wide as she watched him shape the iron. "What is it?" she whispered. Malachi didn't look up. "A tool," he murmured. Her eyes narrowed. "A tool for what?" His silence was the answer. She left without another word. But word spread anyway, not openly, not spoken in full sentences, but in nods, in half-smiles, in the way people glanced at the forge with new reverence. The blade took weeks. Every curve of steel had to be disguised, every step of progress hidden beneath piles of scrap. During the day, it looked like nothing more than a ruined piece of iron. At night, under Malachi's hands, it became something sharper, deadlier. One evening, the young man who had once confronted him returned. "You're really doing it," he said, voice trembling. Malachi didn't stop hammering. "Leave," he replied, the same as before. But this time the boy didn't move. "If you strike him down, you won't stand alone." Malachi paused, the hammer suspended. His eyes met the boy's, full of fear, but also fire. For the first time Malachi spoke more than a word. "Then stand ready." The axe was nearly finished now. Its edge gleamed even in the dim light. Its weight was perfect, balanced, waiting. Malachi wrapped the handle in rough cloth, hiding its true nature beneath layers that made it look like any other farm tool. Yet those who saw it, even briefly, knew. This was no tool for cotton, no tool for wood. This was judgment, forged in fire, waiting to fall. Outside, the overseer slept soundly, dreaming of his own power. He had no idea that his end was being shaped just yards away, each strike of Malachi's hammer sealing his fate. And when the blade was done, when Malachi finally quenched it in water and held it aloft in the glow of the forge, the silence that followed was deafening. The secret weapon was ready. Night fell heavy, pressing down on the fields like a suffocating hand. The moon was a thin, sickle-shaped blade cutting the sky into shadows. In the quarters, whispers curled like smoke. Everyone felt it. Something was coming. Malachi sat alone in the forge, staring at the axe. The fire had been doused, but the weapon still seemed to glow. His hand tightened around the handle, the rough cloth biting into his palm. A voice came from the doorway. "Is it time?" It was the young man again, trembling, his eyes darting like a hunted animal. Malachi didn't answer. He rose, hefting the axe onto his shoulder, and stepped into the night. The air was thick with silence. Dogs barked faintly in the distance, chains rattled, and the overseer's cabin loomed at the edge of the field, its windows flickering with lamplight. The people followed, not in a march, not in a shout, but in silence. Bare feet pressed into the dirt. Eyes glimmered in the darkness. No orders were given, no plan was spoken. They moved as one. Inside his cabin, the overseer poured himself a drink. The glass clinked against wood. He muttered curses about disobedience, about laziness, about punishment yet to come. He had no idea that his punishment was already at the door. The boy whispered, "Now, Malachi." The blacksmith pushed forward. The door groaned as it swung open, and the overseer's head snapped up. His face shifted from anger to confusion, then to sudden, dawning fear. "What is this?" he barked. "Back to your quarters." But Malachi didn't move back. He stepped forward, the axe gleaming in the lamplight. The overseer reached for his whip. His voice cracked, not with command, but with panic. "I'll flay you alive, boy." The words were cut short by the first swing. The axe cleaved the whip from his hand, splitting wood and leather alike. The overseer stumbled back, crashing into his table, his drink spilling red across the floorboards. The room erupted. Shadows surged through the doorway, hands grabbing, voices rising, years of rage pouring out at once. The overseer screamed, not as a master, but as prey. Malachi raised the axe again. This time it did not fall on leather or wood. The sound was sickening, final. Blood sprayed across the lamp, snuffing its light. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by ragged breathing. When the silence came, it was not peace. It was heavy, pulsing, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Someone whispered, "It's done." But Malachi was not finished. He dragged the body, the lifeless overseer, across the dirt. The people followed, stunned, silent, watching as their blacksmith became something more. At the cotton gin, Malachi lifted the corpse onto the great wheel. His hands did not shake. The iron chains wrapped tight, binding the overseer in death, as he had bound others in life. The wheel turned, slowly at first, then faster, creaking, groaning, until blood dripped from its rim. The dawn would reveal it to all. A warning carved in flesh and iron. A message no one could ignore. Malachi stepped back, chest heaving, the axe still in his hand. The boy whispered again, voice trembling, "What happens now?" Malachi's eyes fixed on the turning wheel, red in the moonlight. "Now," he said, "they will see." Dawn broke slow and pale, the kind of light that stretched thin across the fields before the sun fully rose. The cotton leaves glistened with dew, bending under the weight of silence. But this was no ordinary silence. It was the silence of something unnatural, something the land itself recoiled from. The cotton gin stood tall against the horizon, its wheel turning with lazy creaks. But as the workers gathered, their steps faltered. Gasps cut through the air like knives. The overseer's body hung sprawled across the iron spokes, bound tight, crimson dripping onto white cotton below. His face was frozen mid-scream, his limbs twisted grotesquely, his flesh broken by the steel that once commanded others to labor. No one spoke at first. Eyes widened, mouths opened, but no sound came. Then a whisper, "He's gone." Another, "Who did this?" The question was dangerous, and everyone knew it, but the air was too heavy to hold it in. The boy who had shadowed Malachi looked at him now. His lips parted, but Malachi's stare silenced him. The blacksmith stood apart, his axe hidden once more, his face unreadable. The wheel turned again, groaning like an omen. Blood streaked the rim, dripping onto the dirt, soaking it red. With each turn it seemed to chant, over and over, that justice had been delivered. A woman fell to her knees, clutching her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was not weeping for the dead. She was weeping for something else. Freedom, fear, disbelief. The field hands shifted uneasily. Some stared in awe, others in terror. None dared touch the body. To do so would be to undo the message. From the big house a window cracked open. A white face peered out, then another. Voices carried faintly, sharp, urgent. They had seen. The alarm bell clanged, breaking the spell. Metal rang across the plantation, calling masters, guards, dogs. "Back to work, Avo." Ice bellowed from the porch, but no one moved. They only stood, staring at the spinning wheel and the overseer chained to it. Malachi's hand curled into a fist at his side. His heart pounded, but his expression did not change. This was not the end. It was the beginning. The boy whispered at his shoulder, "They'll come for us now." Malachi answered low, almost too soft to hear, "Let them." The dogs barked, straining at their chains. Riders mounted horses, rifles slung across shoulders. But even as power gathered itself, something had shifted in the air. For once the workers did not lower their heads. They looked up. They looked at the wheel, at the blood dripping onto cotton, and their eyes carried fire. A question remained unspoken, heavy in every throat. Was this justice, or the opening of war? The overseer's silence answered. His body said what no voice dared. The cotton gin creaked again, spinning slow, steady, unstoppable. And with it, the story of Malachi and his weapon spread beyond the quarters, beyond the fields. The masters would hear, the county would hear, and nothing, not even silence, could hide what had been done. The wind carried more than dust that morning. It carried whispers. What had been seen at the cotton gin spread like wildfire, faster than horses could gallop, faster than chains could bind. By noon the nearby plantations were buzzing. Field hands leaned close, speaking low so overseers wouldn't hear. The wheel turned red, they whispered. The master's man was chained to it, split open, hung for all to see. At the river crossing, a trader heard the tale from a trembling ferryman. By evening the story had reached the taverns. Drunken men muttered over mugs, some with fear, others with awe. One slammed his cup on the table. "Mark my words, this wasn't no accident. Someone planned this." The crowd leaned in. "Who?" one asked. The man shrugged. "A blacksmith, strong as iron, eyes like fire, name's Malachi." The name clung to the air, sharp, unshakable. Meanwhile, in the quarters, the story grew in different directions. Some told it as legend. Malachi forged a blade in secret, hammered from the chains of his people, quenched in his own blood. Others said the overseer had been dragged to hell and the devil himself had set his body on the gin. Children repeated the whispers like lullabies. Old men shook their heads, half proud, half terrified. Mothers warned their sons, "Don't say it too loud, don't let the whites hear." But the whites had already heard. At the courthouse steps in town, the judge received frantic reports. Overseers spoke of unrest, of eyes lifted where heads once bowed. Merchants muttered that shipments were delayed, that workers were distracted, murmuring of vengeance. One planter slammed his fist against a railing. "If we don't crush this now, it'll spread. Today it's one overseer, tomorrow it'll be all of us." But another spoke more quietly, almost afraid. "What if it already has?" Back on the plantation, the masters interrogated the enslaved. Whips cracked. Questions spat like venom. Who did it? Who touched him? Who hung him on the wheel? But no one spoke. Eyes stayed low, lips pressed tight. Even those who had seen Malachi's hand remained silent. Fear bound them, but something stronger held their tongues, a strange, new defiance. Malachi himself returned to the forge. The axe lay hidden beneath straw, its blade gleaming faintly in the dark. He worked the bellows as if nothing had changed, hammering iron into horseshoes, into tools, into the very chains he despised. But every strike carried weight. Every spark reminded him of the night when silence turned to fire. The boy came to him again, whispering, "They're talking about you, even in town." Malachi's jaw clenched. He did not look up. "Let them talk," he said. The boy swallowed hard. "They'll come for you." Malachi set the hammer down, his gaze finally meeting the boy's. "Then I'll be ready." The rumors swelled, unstoppable. They crossed rivers, leapt fences, slipped into parlors and prayer houses. And with each telling, Malachi's act grew larger, more terrible, more magnificent. It was no longer just a killing, it was a sign. The wind carried his name, and the land itself seemed to listen. Tones. They spoke of rebellion, of whispers in the fields, of a body displayed like a banner of war. And then, a decision. Send a man. By dusk, hooves pounded the dirt road leading to the plantation. Dust rose behind a lone rider, hat low, coat stiff, pistol heavy at his side. His name was Mr. Harlan, an investigator known for uncovering plots, a man who prided himself on pulling secrets out of silence. He arrived at the big house as lanterns were being lit. The master stood waiting on the porch, pale with anger. Dogs strained at their leashes, snarling. Behind them, the cotton gin loomed like a gallows, still stained dark from the overseer's body. Harlan dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning the yard, the fields, the faces. He said little, but his gaze lingered too long, as if he could read guilt in the way a man held his shoulders or in how a woman avoided his stare. Inside the parlor, voices rose. "Find me the one who did this," the master demanded, slamming a glass onto the table. Harlan's voice was calm, steady, cutting through the heat. "I will, but you won't like how." He began with questions, to the overseer's replacement, to the drivers, to the field hands pulled aside one by one. His words were sharp, his tone deceptively mild. "Where were you that night? Who saw the forge burning after hours? Which of you knew the overseer best?" Most answered with silence, some stammered half-truths. Others wept, beaten before the questions were even finished. But not one name was given, not one hand pointed to the blacksmith. Harlan noticed, he always noticed. That night he walked alone through the quarters, boots crunching softly against dirt. He stopped by the forge, his fingers brushed the anvil, the bellows, the scattered scrap of iron. His eyes narrowed at the straw in the corner, disturbed, concealing something. But he did not lift it, not yet. The boy, A, peered in the shadows, breath quick, voice tight. "What do you want here?" Harlan turned, his face unreadable. "The truth." The boy's fists clenched. "You won't find it." A faint smile tugged at the investigator's lips. "I always do." Morning came with more interrogations, more whips cracking through the air. But Harlan's method was slower, sharper. He studied eyes, watched shoulders tense, listened to the silences between words. Again and again his gaze returned to Malachi. The blacksmith worked steadily, hammering iron as if the world beyond the forge did not exist. His muscles flexed with each strike, his jaw locked tight. No fear, no confession, no weakness. Harlan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're strong," he said. Malachi did not look up. "I work." "Stronger than most," Harlan pressed. The hammer struck harder, sparks flying. "I work." The exchange ended, but the tension did not. Harlan walked away, but his eyes burned with suspicion. By nightfall, the quarters were restless. Whispers stirred like wind in tall grass. The investigator was not a fool. He was circling closer, closer, waiting for one crack in the silence. And everyone knew, if that silence broke, it would not be one man who paid the price. It would be all of them. The days stretched long, heavy with dread. The air in the quarters no longer carried only whispers. It carried fear sharpened to a blade's edge. Every footstep in the dirt, every creak of the big house door, every bark of the dogs sent hearts racing. Harlan was patient, too patient. He didn't shout, didn't whip, not at first. He simply watched, waiting for someone to break. His silence was more terrifying than rage. By the third day, the master's fury boiled over. He stormed into the quarters with armed men at his side, snapping, "If you won't speak, you'll bleed until you do." The lash cracked, flesh split, cries rang out. But still no names were given. Even under pain, even under terror, the silence held. That night, Malachi sat at the forge, hands clenched so tight around his hammer his knuckles turned white. Sparks flew as he struck metal that didn't need striking. His chest heaved with rage, but his face stayed stone. The boy appeared again, trembling. "They'll kill us all. Don't you see? If you don't end this, they'll tear the quarters apart." Malachi finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "So what would you have me do? Give them my neck? So they can hang me and call it peace?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Better one man than all of us." The words cut deeper than the lash. Malachi turned slowly, his stare burning. "And if they hang me, do you think they'll stop? Do you think the wheel won't turn again?" The boy had no answer. He fled into the night. By morning, the strain cracked the quarters open. Two women argued in whispers over the cooking fire. "It was him," one hissed. "We all know it." The other shook her head violently. "And you'd tell? You'd see him dragged in chains while we go back to the whip?" Their voices carried, and soon the camp was alive with hushed arguments, suspicion poisoning the air, for the first time since the wheel tour. Ned read, Unity trembled. Harlan saw it. He always saw. That evening, he gathered the field hands, pacing before them like a vulture. "I know one of you did it," he said softly, his boots crunching against dirt. "And I know the rest of you are protecting him. But here's the truth. If one doesn't confess, all of you will suffer." He let the words hang, heavy and merciless. "I don't need the guilty man. I only need someone to break." A shiver ran through the crowd. Eyes flicked toward Malachi, then away, fast, as if afraid to linger. The boy swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Harlan stopped in front of the blacksmith. "You," he said, "your hands could swing an axe, your arms could turn a wheel. Tell me, where were you that night?" The forge roared in Malachi's silence. His jaw tightened, but no words left his lips. Harlan's smile was cold. "That's what I thought." The crowd shifted uneasily. The silence that had once protected them was now strangling them, inch by inch, breath by breath. And everyone knew something had to give. Either someone would betray him, or Malachi himself would decide how this story ended. The night air was thick, restless. Crickets sang in the grass, but in the quarters no one slept. Men lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Women clutched their children close, listening for footsteps. The dogs barked from the big house porch, as if they too could smell the fear. Malachi sat by the dying coals of the forge, staring at the axe hidden beneath straw. His hands ached, but not from work, from waiting. Waiting for the sound of chains, waiting for the shout that would drag him into the light. The boy approached again, shoulders hunched, voice raw. "They're pressing harder, Malachi. Tomorrow they'll take someone's life if nobody speaks." Malachi's voice was steady. "Then they'll take it." The boy's face twisted. "And you'll let them? You'll let us all burn for you?" Malachi lifted his gaze, eyes dark as iron. "This wasn't for me." The boy stepped back, torn, trembling. His lips opened, but no words came. He vanished into the shadows, leaving Malachi alone with the embers. By dawn the quarters stirred under the crack of the lash. Harlan stood tall, coat buttoned, eyes cold. "This ends today," he declared. "One voice, that's all I need." The whip whistled, flesh split. A woman cried out, falling to her knees. Her child screamed. Harlan didn't flinch. And then, the boy's voice broke the silence. It was him. The words rang louder than the lash. The crowd froze, eyes wide. The boy stood trembling, arm raised, finger pointing at the blacksmith. It was Malachi. I saw him. I saw him drag the body. He forged the axe. Gasps spread like wildfire. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet Malachi's gaze. The blacksmith didn't move. He stood at the forge, hammer still in his hand, face unreadable. Only his jaw tightened, his eyes burning into the boy who had spoken. Harlan's smile was thin, satisfied. "Bring him." Gua. RDs surged forward, chains clattering. The people parted, some weeping, some silent, all powerless. Malachi raised no resistance. He let the hammer fall to the dirt, the sound heavy, final. His wrists were bound, iron biting his skin. The axe remained hidden under straw, untouched, its secret power now useless. As they dragged him past the crowd, the boy looked away, shame burning his face. But the damage was done. The silence had been broken. A woman whispered, "You damned us." The boy's voice cracked. "I saved us." But no one believed him. Malachi's voice carried, low and calm, as they pulled him toward the big house. "The wheel turns," he said. "And it will turn again." The words chilled the air. Even the guards hesitated, glancing at one another. The chain clinked, dragging him forward, but the echo of his voice lingered long after he was gone. In the quarters the people stood frozen, torn between relief and regret. They had their scapegoat. But deep down they knew. The overseer's blood had not ended the story, it had only begun it. And the boy who betrayed him could feel it too. Every breath was heavy, every glance burned. He had chosen survival, but planted the seed of guilt that would haunt him forever. The sun was merciless, burning down as they marched Malachi to the courthouse. Shackles clinked with every step, the sound sharp against the silence of the streets. White townsfolk lined the roads, faces twisted with curiosity and fear. They whispered his name like a curse, the blacksmith who turned the wheel red. Children were lifted onto shoulders to glimpse the man in chains. Some spat at his feet, others crossed themselves. A woman hissed, "Devil's son." But Malachi walked steady, his shoulders unbowed, his gaze fixed forward. Inside, the courthouse was a theater of power. The wooden benches creaked with bodies pressed close, hungry for blood. The judge sat high above, robes heavy, eyes cold. Planters in their fine coats leaned forward, eager to see justice, white justice, delivered. Malachi was dragged to the center, iron scraping against the floor. They stood him in a wooden dock, chains rattling as he raised his head to meet their eyes. He looked neither broken nor afraid, only unyielding. The prosecutor's voice rang sharp. "This man, this slave, took the life of an overseer, bound him to the cotton gin wheel, and left him for the world to see. He is guilty of rebellion, guilty of murder, guilty of striking at the very order that holds this land together." The crowd murmured approval, heads nodding, hands tightening on canes. The judge's gavel struck. "Bring forth the witnesses." And there, trembling, came the boy, the one who had broken silence. His eyes darted everywhere but Malachi's. He spoke quickly, voice shaking. I saw him drag the body. He had the axe. He did it." The room hissed with satisfaction. The prosecutor smiled. The planters exchanged glances of relief, order restored. Malachi did not speak. He only stared at the boy, long and steady, until the boy's voice faltered, cracking under the weight of his gaze. The silence after was heavier than chains. A preacher stood next, his Bible open, voice thundering. This man was marked by the devil. He worked iron with unholy fire, and when the Lord's overseer corrected him, he repaid with blood. Such sin demands the gallows. Such rebellion demands the rope. The crowd roared, "Amen, amen." Finally the judge turned his gaze upon Malachi. "Do you deny the charges? Do you speak in your defense?" The courtroom leaned forward, waiting. Malachi raised his head, his voice deep, resonant, echoing in the rafters. "I forged iron. I bled for this land. I carried chains heavier than these. But I never bent, and I will not bend now." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order." But Malachi's words lingered. "You call me guilty, but I was born guilty in your eyes. Guilty for my skin, guilty for my hands. So do what you came to do. Bind me, break me, hang me. The wheel will turn again." A silence spread, heavy and uneasy. For a brief moment even the judge seemed unsettled, but the gavel struck once more, final and cold. The court finds the slave Malachi guilty of murder and insurrection. Sentence: death by hanging. The crowd cheered, the chains were yanked. Malachi was dragged back toward the shadows of his cell. Yet even in that moment his words hung above them all, heavier than the verdict. The wheel had not stopped turning. It had only gathered speed. The morning of the hanging broke with a cruel stillness. The sky was pale, drained of color, as if even the heavens had turned away. A gallows stood in the town square, freshly built, its wood rough, its rope swaying like a vulture's wing. By dawn, the crowd had gathered. Men, women, children, faces flushed with anticipation, voices low with gossip. Vendors sold peanuts and cider. Boys climbed trees for a better view. To them, it was spectacle. To Malachi, it was the end of one life and the beginning of another. Chains clattered as they led him out. His bare feet scraped against the cobblestones. Soldiers flanked him, rifles gleaming, their boots striking in rhythm. The boy who had betrayed him stood at the edge of the crowd, head bowed, unable to watch. Gasps rippled when Malachi appeared. Some shouted curses, others muttered prayers. A few, hidden deep in the crowd, lowered their heads in grief. Among them were slaves from nearby plantations, men and women who had stolen away, risking lashes to witness his final defiance. The judge sat on a raised platform, gavel in hand, reading the sentence aloud. His voice was pompous, heavy with self-righteousness. "Malachi, slave and blacksmith, found guilty of murder and insurrection, shall hang by the neck until dead. May this be a warning to all who dream of rebellion." The words echoed. The crowd nodded. Order restored. But when Malachi climbed the gallows, every step was steady. The wood groaned under his weight, but he stood tall, shoulders square, head high. The noose hung before him, a crown of twisted rope. The preacher approached, Bible trembling in his hands. "Confess, son, beg forgiveness, save your soul before you swing." Malachi's eyes locked on him, sharp as a blade. "I was born chained, worked chained, bled chained. If there is a God who made me for that, then he has no forgiveness worth asking for." "Tha!" The preacher recoiled. The crowd murmured, uneasy. Soldiers shifted. The executioner stepped forward, face hidden beneath a hood. He slipped the rope over Malachi's neck, tightening it with rough hands. The fibers dug into skin. Malachi did not flinch. He turned his gaze to the horizon. For a moment he seemed to see beyond the gallows, beyond the jeering faces, beyond the rope. His voice carried, low but unyielding. "You can break my body, but the fire is already lit. You'll never quench it, not with ropes, not with guns, not with fear. The wheel will turn again." A hush swept the square. Even the children grew still. His words, carried by the wind, clung to the ears of those who had gathered. The judge barked, "Proceed." The trapdoor creaked. The rope went taut. The crowd gasped as Malachi's body dropped, swinging in grim silence. Some cheered, some wept, some turned away. But in the back of the square, among the shadows, the slaves who had come to watch clenched their fists. His words had taken root. His death was not an end. It was a seed. The body swayed back and forth, and as it did, whispers began to rise, quiet at first, then louder. A name carried through the crowd. Malachi. The wheel had turned red once more. The body of Malachi still swung when the first rumors left the square. By nightfall they had spread across the county. By week's end they had crossed rivers, crossed borders, carried on wagons and whispers alike. The official story was simple: a dangerous slave executed, justice served. But the truth that passed from mouth to mouth was very different. They didn't speak of his crime. They spoke of his courage. They spoke of the words he spat into the crowd, and they spoke of the wheel, that red turning wheel that had shown everyone what was possible. On plantations miles away, slaves gathered in the shadows after work. Candles burned low. Eyes darted to ensure no overseer lurked nearby. A man leaned close to his companions. They hung him, yes, but they couldn't silence him. A woman nodded, voice trembling yet fierce. He swung, but his words are still here. We carry them. In hushed circles, Malachi became more than a man. He was a symbol. The story grew larger, more impossible with every retelling. Some said he forged the noose into iron before it snapped his neck. Others claimed lightning struck the gallows after his body fell. Children whispered that the cotton gin still turned red at night, haunted by his spirit. Fear should have ended it. Instead, fear fed it. White planters grew restless. They saw it in the fields, the way eyes met when they once looked down. They felt it in the silence, the way workers labored, not with submission, but with a quiet, dangerous unity. One overseer confided in another by the riverbank. They don't look at us the same. It's like they're waiting for something. The other spat into the mud. Then we remind them who holds the whip. But no amount of whippings could erase what Malachi had done. The more they punished, the more the story spread. In towns, free men of color heard of him too. In church basements and secret lodge, his name was spoken like a prayer. Some swore to carry his legacy. Others sharpened blades hidden beneath floorboards. The fire was no longer confined to one forge. It leapt from heart to heart. One night, in a cramped cabin, an old man lifted his chains in the firelight. His voice rasped, yet carried power. He showed us the way. Not with words written in books. Not with promises from men in suits. He showed us with blood. Who here will carry the hammer now? Hands rose. Silent, trembling, but firm. The boy who once betrayed Malachi sat alone that same night, haunted by guilt. He heard the stories too, and each one cut deeper. In his dreams, he saw Malachi's eyes, unbroken, unforgiving, and though shame bound him, even he whispered the name, softer than breath. Malachi. The gallows had taken his body. The rope had stopped his breath. But the fire? The fire spread beyond the reach of soldiers, beyond the reach of judges, beyond the reach of chains. And everywhere, in the stillness of night, when the wind shifted and the cotton rustled, men and women felt the same question stirring in their bones. If Malachi could strike once, why not again? Years passed, but the story of Malachi did not fade. It grew. Like smoke that seeps into walls, it clung to the memory of everyone who had seen, everyone who had heard, and even those who had only imagined. On the plantations, whispers became traditions. Children were rocked to sleep with songs that carried his name. Mothers hummed lullabies that spoke of a blacksmith who defied the lash. The words were simple, but their meaning ran deep. The wheel turned red, the chain broke once. Elders told the story by firelight, their voices low and reverent. He was more than a man. He was iron itself. He bent but did not break. Each generation added a new detail. Some said Malachi's hammer was buried beneath the cotton gin, waiting for the right hands to lift it again. Others claimed his spirit walked at midnight, watching over the enslaved, whispering strength into weary hearts. In the towns, the story morphed differently. Newspapers never printed his name, but they could not erase him. Among abolitionists, he became a symbol, proof of what desperation and injustice could create. Pamphlets carried fragments of his tale northward. Artists drew crude sketches of a man at the gallows, rope tight but eyes blazing. In taverns and courtrooms, his name was spoken with caution, but it was spoken. Some cursed him as a murderer. Others grudgingly admitted a kind of respect. A man who had nothing to lose had shaken them all. For the enslaved, he was not myth. He was a reminder. His defiance showed that even the strongest chains had a breaking point. His death proved that one man could ignite a fire no whip could beat down. And though fear still reigned, though blood still stained the soil, something had shifted. One overseer, years later, confided to another, "I still see his eyes. When they put the rope on him, he wasn't afraid, not one bit. That's what scares me most." But in hidden cabins and whispered prayers, Malachi's courage became a compass. His name was a password, a sign between those who dreamed of freedom. A man would murmur, "Malachi," and another would answer with a nod, and in that nod lay a shared truth, that hope could outlive the rope. The boy who had betrayed him grew into a man burdened with memory. He carried shame like a second skin, but he also carried the fire. Quietly, he helped others run. Each time he guided someone through the night, he whispered into the dark, "This is for you." He knew he could never erase his betrayal, but he could pass the spark forward. Malachi's name never appeared in ledgers or official histories. To the powerful, he was erased. To the oppressed, he was eternal. His legacy was not in the gallows where he swung. It was in the courage he left behind, in the songs, in the whispers, in the eyes of men and women who refused to bow forever. Malachi had shown them one truth that no judge, no rope, no wheel could bury. A man can die, but defiance does not. The gallows are gone now. The cotton fields stand empty, their machines rusting in silence. Time has covered the bloodstains, the cries, the chains. But stories endure. And among them, Malachi's rises like smoke from a smoldering fire. We do not know every detail. Was the overseer tied to the wheel by Malachi's own hand or by unseen allies? Was the axe he forged quenched in blood or merely in water? Did the boy betray him out of fear, or was betrayal simply the way survival whispered to the weak? History does not answer. It only leaves echoes. But what we do know is this. A man born in chains chose defiance over silence. He carried no banners, wrote no speeches. His protest was iron, sharpened into a blade. His verdict was delivered not in words, but in blood. Was it murder? Was it justice? Or was it something far more dangerous? A glimpse of what happens when the oppressed are pushed beyond breaking. The wheel turning red was more than a single act. It was a symbol, grotesque yet unforgettable. A warning to some, a promise to others. Even now the story lingers, passed in whispers, painted into legend, reshaped by each tongue that carried it forward. In cabins, it was hope. In parlors, it was fear. In courtrooms, it was a name spoken like a curse. But everywhere, it lived. Think of the crowd that day at the gallows. Thousands gathered to watch one man swing. They expected to see defeat. Yet what they witnessed was defiance. A body broken, yes, but a spirit unshaken. Words hurled into the air like sparks. The fire is already lit. You'll never quench it. And those sparks did not die. They smoldered. They spread. So what do we take from Malachi's story? That violence breeds more violence? That one man's rage can ripple through generations? Or that sometimes justice refuses to wear the mask of peace and comes instead like a hammer striking iron? The question lingers, heavy as the rope that once swung him. Was Malachi a murderer or a martyr? The answer depends on who tells the story. For those who profited from his chains, he was a criminal. For those who bore the lash beside him, he was proof that chains could be broken. For us, years later, he is something in between, a reminder that freedom has always been born from struggle, from fire, from blood. As you hear his name, ask yourself, what would you have seen that night by the gin wheel? A monster? A hero? Or just a man, unwilling to bow one moment longer? History is not silent. It whispers through stories like this. And in the silence after, one truth remains unshakable. A man can be killed. A man can be erased from books. But the act of defiance, once struck, cannot be undone. The wheel turned red once, and maybe, just maybe, it can turn again.